I had never imagined that something as simple as spending an evening with my dog, Bailey, could turn into one of the most memorable nights of my life. It all began a few weeks ago when my husband, once again, packed his suitcase and left for another business trip. These trips had become routine over the years. His career demanded frequent travel, leaving me and Bailey alone in the house. The house itself, though warm and inviting in design, felt hollow in his absence. It wasn't just the lack of his physical presence. It was the way the silence seemed to creep into every corner, wrapping itself around me like a heavy fog. Bailey, our golden retriever, had been with us for 5 years, a bright spark of joy that had entered our lives as a clumsy, tail-wagging puppy. Over time, he'd grown into a steadfast companion, a constant in my life while my husband was often away. His golden coat shimmered in the sunlight, and his soulful brown eyes carried an intelligence that never failed to amaze me. On nights like this, when the house seemed larger and emptier than ever, Bailey's presence was my anchor. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long, I tried to distract myself from the silence. I turned on the TV, scrolled endlessly through my phone, and even put on a podcast, but nothing seemed to fill the void. Dinner was a quiet affair, a reheated bowl of leftover pasta eaten at the kitchen island. Bailey sat patiently by my side, his eyes following my every move, his tail thumping softly against the floor as if to remind me he was there. After dinner, I sank into the plush cushions of the living room couch with a glass of wine in hand. Bailey settled at my feet, his warm body a comforting weight against my legs. The glow of a single lamp bathed the room in a soft golden light, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Reaching down, I let my fingers thread through his thick fur, savoring the simple comfort of his presence. "You're all I've got tonight, huh?" I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Bailey responded with a soft huff, his tail wagging gently in acknowledgement. His unwavering loyalty and quiet companionship had become my refuge on nights like these. He wasn't just a pet, he was my confidant, the one being who seemed to truly understand the parts of me I couldn't express out loud. As the hours passed, the quietness of the house began to feel less like an oppressive weight and more like a backdrop to our shared companionship. Bailey shifted closer, resting his head on my lap, his eyes gazing up at me with a tenderness that melted the ache in my chest. I ran my fingers through his fur absent-mindedly, my thoughts drifting. "You know, Bailey," I began, my voice soft and tinged with melancholy. "Sometimes I wonder if he even realizes how much time he spent away. I mean, I know he's working hard, and I'm grateful for everything he does for us, but..." My voice trailed off as I struggled to put my feelings into words. Bailey's ears twitched, and he looked up at me with those knowing eyes that seemed to say, "I'm here. I understand. You get it, don't you?" I continued, my hand resting on his side. "You're here. You always are." The words hung in the air, carrying with them a mix of gratitude and longing. Bailey let out a soft sigh, his chest rising and falling rhythmically under my hand. The steady cadence of his breathing grounded me, and for the first time that night, the silence didn't feel so overwhelming. The minutes ticked by, the wine in my glass dwindling as the edges of my thoughts softened. Bailey stayed curled up beside me, his body warm and reassuring. In the quiet of that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before: how much I relied on him. His unconditional love and presence filled a void I hadn't even known was there. Eventually, I leaned back into the couch, letting my eyes drift closed as the soft hum of the refrigerator and Bailey's gentle breathing became the soundtrack of the night. My hand rested on his side, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. In the stillness, with Bailey by my side, the weight of loneliness lifted ever so slightly, replaced by a quiet contentment. Bailey wasn't just a dog. He was my partner in solitude, my quiet guardian in the empty spaces of my life. And as I sat there with him that night, I realized that, in his own way, he had given me something precious, a reminder that love doesn't always need words, and that even in the silence, we are never truly alone. I had built a life that, by most measures, was solid. It wasn't extraordinary, but it wasn't bad either. We had a nice house, financial stability, and a routine that kept everything running smoothly, for the most part. But somewhere along the way, the vibrancy of it all faded. It began to feel hollow, like a puzzle missing its most critical piece. I couldn't pinpoint when it started, but the distance between us grew into a quiet chasm. Neither of us said it out loud, but the gap was there, ever present, like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. Bailey nudged my hand with his cold nose, pulling me from the depths of my thoughts. I glanced down at him and couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, buddy," I murmured, scratching the soft fur behind his ears. "You always know when I need you, don't you?" His golden brown eyes glowed with warmth, his tail wagging softly, a silent reassurance that he was there for me. Moments like these reminded me how much he meant to me. He wasn't just a dog. He was a companion, a lifeline, a gentle reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. We stayed on the couch for hours that evening, Bailey sprawled out beside me, his steady breathing grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. The heaviness of the day gradually lifted, replaced by a faint sense of peace as his presence filled the empty spaces. When I finally decided to go to bed, Bailey followed me, as he always did, curling up in a spot at the foot of my bed. As I turned off the light and lay down, I whispered into the stillness, "Good night, Bailey. Thank you for being here." The next morning, I woke to the rhythmic thumping of Bailey's tail against the wooden floor. He always seemed to know when I needed a little extra encouragement to start the day. His eager eyes peeked over the edge of the bed, a cheerful bark escaping him as if to say, "Good morning. Time to get up." I swung my legs over the side of the bed, reaching out to scratch his head. All right, I'm up," I said, laughing softly. Bailey darted to the bedroom door, pausing to look back at me, his whole body radiating anticipation. This was our routine now, his quiet way of nudging me forward, reminding me that life continued, even when the house felt too big, too quiet without my husband there. After a simple breakfast, Bailey trotted to the sliding glass door leading to the backyard, his tail wagging furiously in anticipation. I grabbed his leash from the hook by the door, his excitement escalating with every movement. His entire body practically buzzed with energy. A walk felt like the right way to clear my head, to brush off the lingering weight of the previous night's reflections. The neighborhood was still waking up. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional bird chirping or the distant hum of a lawnmower. Bailey walked beside me, his leash slack, his steps perfectly in sync with mine. That was one of the things I adored most about him, his steady, calming presence. Even when my world felt like it was spiraling, Bailey had a way of pulling me back, anchoring me in the here and now. As we passed the park, I decided to let him off the leash. He bounded ahead, ears flopping, his joy as infectious as ever. Watching him run, so carefree and full of life, brought a rare smile to my face. It was hard not to feel lighter when he was like this, so utterly alive. I found a bench in the sun and sat down, letting its warmth seep into my skin as I watched Bailey chase a squirrel. It wasn't a serious chase, more of a playful, half-hearted effort that made me chuckle. "You're ridiculous, you know that?" I called out, my laughter carrying across the quiet park. Bailey turned and trotted back toward me, his tail wagging furiously, tongue lolling out of his mouth. He flopped down at my feet, his head resting on his paws. We sat there together for a while, basking in the stillness of the morning. As I often did when it was just the two of us, I started talking to him. There was something comforting about it, speaking my thoughts aloud to Bailey. It wasn't that I expected him to understand every word, but there was solace in the way he listened, his eyes steady and kind. He was my sounding board, my confidant when the words felt too heavy to share with anyone else. In that moment, sitting there with Bailey by my side, the quiet didn't feel so lonely anymore. It felt like a gentle reminder that sometimes all we need is a little companionship, a silent, unwavering presence to help us navigate the spaces in between. I sat on the bench, Bailey's head resting against my knee, his big, soulful eyes gazing up at me. "I don't know, Bailey," I murmured, my hand reaching down to gently scratch behind his ears. "Do you ever think about what life could have been like if things were different? If we weren't stuck in the same routine, day after day?" Bailey didn't answer, of course. But the way he looked at me, so attentive and understanding, made me feel like he could hear every word I said, and maybe even understand. It was a ridiculous thought. How could a dog grasp the complexities of human longing? And yet, in moments like this, it felt like he truly could. "Don't get me wrong," I continued, leaning back against the worn wood of the bench. "I'm grateful for what we have, but sometimes it feels like something's missing, like there's this hole in my chest, and I don't know how to fill it." Bailey let out a soft whine, as if he could sense the weight of my words. His warm, solid head pressed into my leg, and guilt prickled at the edges of my thoughts. "I'm sorry," I said, running my fingers over the silky fur at the top of his head. "You shouldn't have to listen to me ramble about this stuff. It's not your burden to bear." But Bailey didn't seem to mind. He stayed there, his tail wagging in slow, steady rhythm against the ground, a comforting beat in the quiet of the park. Moments like these reminded me just how much I relied on him, not just as a pet, but as a companion, a constant in a life that often felt like it was drifting out of focus. As the morning wore on, we made our way home. The rest of the day was filled with mundane tasks: laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping. Bailey followed me from room to room, his presence a quiet but undeniable source of comfort. Wherever I went, he flopped down in a corner, his watchful eyes tracking my every move as if to silently reassure me, "I'm here. You're not alone." That evening, after a simple dinner eaten in silence, I found myself curled up on the couch with Bailey beside me. The loneliness that usually pressed against me like a heavy weight during my husband's absences was still there, but it didn't feel quite as suffocating. Bailey had a way of making the silence less oppressive, of filling the emptiness with his quiet companionship. I reached down to stroke his fur, letting my fingers trail through the soft, wavy coat. "You're a lifesaver, you know that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Bailey responded with a soft sigh, his tail thumping lazily against the couch. I smiled despite myself, leaning back and letting the tension melt away for the first time all day. His warmth against my side was grounding, a tether that kept me anchored even when everything else felt uncertain. As the evening stretched on, I found myself reflecting on the bond we shared. It wasn't just about loyalty or companionship, though those things were certainly part of it. There was something deeper, an unspoken understanding, a connection that felt almost human. In Bailey's eyes, I saw a quiet assurance, a reminder that even in my loneliest moments, I wasn't truly alone. We stayed like that long after the sun had set, the two of us cocooned in the quiet warmth of our shared space. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but in that moment, it felt like enough. The days blurred together, each one a carbon copy of the last. My husband's return was delayed, again. Another business trip stretched longer than expected. I told myself I was fine with it. After all, I'd grown used to his absences over the years. But as the days dragged on, I found myself leaning on Bailey more and more. It was late afternoon when I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes while Bailey lay sprawled in the doorway, his ears twitching at the faint sounds from the neighborhood. The golden light of the setting sun poured through the window, bathing the room in a warm glow. And yet, despite the light, I felt a deep, inescapable coldness inside. "Bailey," I called softly, breaking the silence. He lifted his head, his eyes locking onto mine with an almost uncanny understanding. "Let's get out of here," I said, wiping my hands and grabbing his leash. We didn't have a destination in mind. The simple act of leaving the house felt like a small rebellion against the monotony of my days. Bailey sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, ears flapping in the breeze. His joy was infectious, and for the first time all day, I felt myself smiling. Eventually, we ended up at a nature reserve on the outskirts of town. The walking trails were quiet, the air filled with the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. I unclipped Bailey's leash, watching as he bounded ahead, his tail wagging with unbridled enthusiasm. I followed at a slower pace, the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet grounding me in the present. Bailey darted between the trees, pausing every so often to glance back at me, as if to make sure I was still there. His energy was contagious, lifting the heavy fog that had been sitting on my chest all day. We walked for what felt like hours, the quiet of the woods wrapping around us like a comforting embrace. By the time we returned to the car, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo, and the stars were beginning to peek through. Driving home, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for weeks. That night, as I sat on the couch with Bailey curled up beside me, I realized something profound. Bailey wasn't just a companion. He was my anchor, my constant in a world that often felt unsteady. His unwavering presence reminded me that, even in the quietest, loneliest moments, I was never truly alone. The crisp, clean air carried a quiet serenity, one that began to unwind the tension coiled tightly in my shoulders. Each step we took seemed to breathe life back into me. Bailey walked beside me, his tail wagging gently, his joy in the simple act of exploring contagious. For the first time in what felt like weeks, my mind began to quiet, the storm of thoughts that had plagued me fading into the background. As I walked, my thoughts turned to the life I had built with my husband. I loved him, at least I believed I did. But that love, once vibrant and full of life, now felt like a faint echo, a habit worn smooth by time. What was left resembled quiet companionship more than the fiery bond we once shared. In his absence, it was Bailey who had become my constant, his steadfast loyalty filling the void left by that dimmed spark. His presence was a balm to my restless heart, a tether that kept me from drifting too far into my own loneliness. We found a small clearing, dappled in soft, golden light. A fallen log lay at its center, and I sank onto it, watching as Bailey sniffed the ground, his curiosity leading him in circles around me. The gentle sway of his tail and his satisfied sniffs brought a small smile to my lips. Eventually, he trotted back to me, flopping down on my feet with a contented sigh. I reached down, my fingers finding the familiar softness behind his ears. He nuzzled into my hand, his warm, steady presence grounding me once more. "You're my rock, you know that," I murmured. My voice was barely above a whisper, but Bailey's ears twitched, and he looked up at me with those expressive, golden eyes. There was a warmth in his gaze, a quiet understanding that made my chest tighten. Moments like these reminded me of just how much he had come to mean to me. In a world that often felt too quiet, Bailey's unwavering presence was a lifeline. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, and the air grew cooler. But I stayed rooted to the spot, cocooned in the peace of the moment. Time seemed to slow, the weight of the world outside fading until it was just the two of us. In that stillness, a strange clarity settled over me. The heaviness in my chest lightened, leaving me free to simply exist, if only for a while. As we made our way back to the car, I realized how much I had needed this. Needed the space, the quiet, the escape from the endless cycle of thoughts that had been circling my mind. Bailey trotted beside me, his steps perfectly in sync with mine, his presence as steady as ever. I glanced down at him, a surge of gratitude swelling within me. He wasn't just a dog. He was my anchor, the one constant that made the loneliness bearable. The drive home was quiet, the setting sun casting the sky in breathtaking colors. Bailey curled up in the passenger seat, his head resting on his paws, his breathing slow and rhythmic. I reached over, resting a hand on his back, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I had been searching for. When we arrived, the house felt less empty, less oppressive. Bailey patted inside, his tail wagging lazily, and settled onto his bed near the couch. I sank into the cushions, a quiet contentment washing over me. The bond we shared was unlike anything else in my life. Pure, uncomplicated, and steady. That night, as I lay in bed, Bailey curled at my feet, I found myself reflecting on the connection we shared. It wasn't something I could easily put into words, but it was real, tangible. It filled the empty spaces my husband's absence left behind. Bailey wasn't just a companion. He was my confidant, my partner, my closest friend. And for now, that was enough. Or, at least, I told myself it was. The following night was darker than usual, the kind of inky blackness that seemed to wrap itself around the house, pressing against the windows. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension, as though a storm was waiting to break. Bailey padded beside me as I moved through the house, his steps silent but grounding. I hadn't turned on the lights, letting the faint glow of the moon guide me as I made my way to the couch. Sinking into the cushions, I felt the weight of the quiet settle around me. Bailey leapt up beside me, his head finding its usual spot on my lap. I stroked his fur absently, my thoughts swirling like restless leaves caught in the wind. "You're all I have right now," I murmured, the words barely audible in the stillness. Bailey responded with a soft huff, his tail thumping against the couch. He looked up at me, his golden eyes filled with an understanding that made my chest ache. I let out a shaky breath, my hand stilling in his fur. "It's just us, isn't it? You and me." The words hung in the air, heavier than I intended, but Bailey didn't seem to mind. He nuzzled closer, his warmth seeping into me as the weight of my loneliness pressed harder. The connection between us felt different that night, stronger. It wasn't just the comfort of his presence or the way he seemed to sense my every mood. It was something deeper, a bond that went beyond words or logic. I leaned back, closing my eyes as I let myself sink into the moment. The quiet, the warmth of Bailey beside me, the steady rhythm of his breathing, it all blurred the edges of time. My hand moved to his head, my fingers tracing the soft curve of his ears. He let out a low, contented sigh, his tail wagging gently against the couch. His steady presence grounded me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I opened my eyes, glancing down at him. His gaze met mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The room, the empty house, the ache of my husband's absence, it all dissolved, leaving just the two of us. My hand lingered on his head, brushing through his fur as I felt an inexplicable pull, a connection so strong it left me breathless. Bailey shifted, pressing closer to me, his warmth a balm to the cold emptiness that had settled in my chest. I leaned forward slightly, my forehead resting against his as I closed my eyes again, letting the moment wash over me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt, a mix of comfort and longing, gratitude, and something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I whispered, my voice trembling. Slightly, Bailey responded with a soft nuzzle, his nose brushing against my cheek as his tail wagged once more. It was as though he understood, as though he felt the same unspoken bond that had grown between us the minutes stretched on the world outside the house forgotten as I stayed there with Bailey the Kinect. Tie-in between us, wrapping around me like a lifeline. It wasn't just that he was here, that he was loyal and steady and always by my side. It was the way he made me feel seen, understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that, but when I finally pulled back, my heart was racing, my breath shallow. Bailey's eyes were locked on mine, his expression calm, but intense, as though he was waiting for something. My hand lingered on his head, my fingers trailing down to his collar as I struggled to find the words to explain what I was feeling, but there were no words for this, no way. To capture the depth of what Bailey meant to me, of how his presence had filled the empty spaces in my life, all I could do was sit there, my hand on his fur, my heart pounding as I tried to process the moment. Eventually, I leaned back against the couch, my hand still resting on Bailey. As he settled beside me, once more the weight of the moment lingered, a quiet reminder of the bond we shared, of the way he had become so much more than just a dog to me. As the night wore on, I felt a sense of clarity settle over me, the kind that came not from logic, but from something deeper, something instinctive. By Leigh had always been my anchor, my constant in a world that often felt too chaotic, too lonely, and in that moment I realized just how much I needed him, not just as a companion, but as a lifeline to remind. Or that I wasn't alone. The house was still silent. As I eventually made my way to bed, Bailey following close behind, he curled up at the foot of the bed, his presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't it. Utterly alone, I lay there in the darkness, my thoughts still swirling, but my heart a little lighter, a little more at peace. As I drifted off to sleep, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Bailey, for Everett." He was looking at me. In a way, he could feel what I felt, the loneliness, the desire for some excitement. His eyes were telling me he was the one that could give that to me when my husband was away. Yes. Omething in me started to shift, asking myself, if I needed to give in on those temptations. Maybe I shook my head, no, I can't do this, although something in me definitely wanted to, a part of me won. Ted to find out what he was up to, and maybe later on I would give him that temptation, but not yet. I wasn't ready for it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, casting a golden GL. Out across the room, I blinked awake, the heaviness of the night, before still lingering in the back of my mind. Bailey was already up, sitting patiently by the bed, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, deliberate movements. "Morning, buddy," I murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. He leaned into my hand, his warm breath tickling my wrist. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. As I got ready for the day, Bailey followed me from room to room, his presence a quiet comfort. The events of the previous night lingered in my mind, vivid and raw, as though they had etched themselves in my memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us, though I wasn't sure what it meant. After breakfast, I found myself back on the couch, Bailey at him. Why feet? The quiet of the house felt less oppressive today, more like a cocoon than a void. I let my fingers trail through Bailey's fur, my mind drifting as I tried to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. For years, I had buried my feelings, pushed them down beneath the surface to keep life running smoothly, but Bailey had a way of drawing them out, of making me confront the loneliness I tried so hard to ignore. His unwavering loyalty, his quiet understanding, it had been a lifeline, one I hadn't realized I needed until it was too late. Bailey was looking at me with those eyes again, and all of a sudden I just couldn't resist it anymore. We had a bond so close, I just needed to give, and it was as if he was telling me that he could fill my void of loneliness with some excitement. I leaned in tow towards him, and he immediately knew. I kissed him, and there was such a tension between us that I can't quite name. His tail was moving very fast, and of course I can't go into full details, but I can tell th. And I let myself go. I went on my knees and turned around. Wow, when Bailey was doing his thing, I could have never imagined that it could be that good. The bond we shared even strengthened while we were doing. And it was so amazing. After I think 30 to 40 minutes, he finished, and I sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "What are we doing, Bailey?" I asked softly, my voice tinged with a mix of wonder and confusion. He looked up at me, his golden eyes meeting mine, and for a moment it felt like he was waiting for an answer. To the rest of the day passed in a haze of mundane tasks and fleeting moments of clarity. Why I folded laundry, cleaned the kitchen, and walked Bailey through the neighborhood, all the while feeling the weight of the bond we shared pressing against me. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore. No matter how hard I tried, by the time evening rolled around, I felt restless, a nervous energy thrumming through me that I couldn't quite shake. I grabbed Bailey's leash and headed out the door, needing to clear my head. The air was crisp and cool, the faint scent of wood smoke drifting on the breeze. As we made our way to the park, the paths were quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the street lamps. Indeed, the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. Bailey trotted beside me, his steps steady and confident. As he matched my pace, I let him lead the way, trusting his instincts as we wandered deep into the park. We eventually found ourselves at a secluded clearing, the grass damp with dew and the air humming with the quiet sounds of the night. I sat down on a bench, Bailey settling at my feet, his body warm against the coolness of the evening. The stars overhead were bright, scattered across the sky like shards of glass, and for a moment I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. Bailey shifted, resting his head on my knee, and I reached down to stroke his fur. The familiar motion grounded me. "You've always been here for me, haven't you?" I said softly, my voice barely breaking the stillness of the night. Bailey responded with a quiet whine, his tail wagging gently against the floor. It was such a small thing, but it filled my chest with a warmth that chased away the lingering shadows of doubt and loneliness. Bailey wasn't just my dog. He was my partner, my anchor, the one constant in a world that often felt too big and too empty. As the minutes stretched into hours, I found myself speaking aloud, the words spilling out as though a dam had broken inside me. I told Bailey everything, the fears that kept me awake at night, the doubts I tried so hard to suppress, the ache of a marriage that had drifted into something routine and devoid of connection. I spoke about the long, silent nights where his steady presence had been the only thing keeping me together. I told him how, in moments of despair, he had been my lifeline, the quiet companionship that reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. And through it all, Bailey stayed by my side, his gaze unwavering. His silent support offering a comfort words could never match. There was a loyalty in Bailey that I couldn't put into words. A love so pure it filled the cracks in my heart I hadn't even realized were there. The drive home that evening was quiet, but it wasn't the emptiness I'd grown used to. It was a fullness, a calmness, as though the air itself had weight and meaning. Bailey curled up in the passenger seat, his eyes fluttering shut as the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the road lulled him to sleep. I glanced over at him, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. My hand reached out instinctively, brushing through his fur. He twitched slightly, but didn't stir. His trust in me, so complete it made my chest tighten with emotion. When we arrived home, the house didn't feel as cold or hollow as it usually did. It was strange how the presence of a four-legged companion could transform a space. Bailey followed me to the couch, his tail wagging softly as he jumped up beside me. I curled up beneath a blanket, and he settled against me, his warmth radiating through the quiet. In that moment, the world outside didn't matter. The worries and fears, the endless spiral of what-ifs, they all seemed to fade. Bailey was there, and that was enough. I let my head rest against the back of the couch, my fingers tracing idle patterns through his fur. "You're my rock," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You've always been my rock." Bailey shifted closer, pressing his body against mine. His tail wagged gently, the sound barely audible but reassuring. The connection between us was undeniable, a bond that didn't need words, one that went beyond explanation. It was simply there, steadfast and real, and I found comfort in its simplicity. As the hours slipped by, the house grew quieter, the outside world fading into the stillness of the night. I stayed there with Bailey, his steady presence grounding me. The soft rhythm of his breathing became my anchor, and slowly, I let myself drift into a haze of peacefulness. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges or uncertainties lay ahead, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Bailey would be there. His loyalty would be unwavering. His love a constant in a world that so often felt unpredictable and chaotic. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. A quiet certainty settled over me. I wasn't alone. As sleep pulled me under, Bailey curled up beside me, his body pressed close as though he, too, needed the reassurance. And in that fleeting, tender moment, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together.